Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, Being Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable, features me, James Eves. We talk about why my first goal was to be international, how my passion and dedication to rugby transformed my life, what MBA really stands for, and my skill in performing monologues.
James Eves is the co-founder of Inspiration North and a director of Insights Business Psychology. He has had an unusual career within real estate, construction, manufacturing and training across 3 continents. He speaks 3 languages, has an MBA, and his experience expands both the entrepreneurial startup and big corporate worlds. He has lived in New York, Stockholm, Hong Kong, La Rochelle, and has returned to Newcastle to build his empire. Inspiring humans to create happier, more fulfilling lives by taking action, James gets so much energy seeing people grow, develop, change direction and find their purpose. For him, the Inspiration North podcast is a way of getting the message out to more people to inspire them to be their best selves.
So we are in the Inspiration North headquarters in a new year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
But it's just you and me, Michelle. Did I forget to send an invitation out to somebody or... Oh no, it's my podcast today, isn't it?
Oh yes.
The one we've been putting off for ages and ages. Oh, I've got loads of time over Christmas and I'll just do it then. And it's like, oh, it's a new year. We've got to get them done.
Yep.
So yeah.
I almost feel like I could be really cruel to you today, but I'm not. Don't worry. So, James, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I think my first memory was that I probably, like many young boys, wanted to be Spider-Man. I used to have these really cool Spider-Man trainers. There's not the same kind of merchandise back in the 80s that you can get now, but I used to have these trainers, and the house next door, I used to, practice being Spider-Man. So between our house and the garage next door, I'd push myself up between the walls. I think I was only caught once from my mum.
Do we need to get a video of you doing that?
I could probably still do it, but it would probably bring back memories of my mum giving me a right rollicking. So I ended up stopping that because I'd probably get halfway up the house. And so not the safest perhaps, but it was the 80s when you could get away with things.
Don't try this at home, children.
And then my mum threw those out because I think my sister got them actually because they were too small for me. So I remember being in floods of tears. I was probably about 6 or 7. And then in terms of what I wanted to be, so I couldn't be Spider-Man, but I had a next door neighbour. His name was Duncan, and he worked at the time for International Paint. And what was happening, he was flying across to Europe probably once or twice a week. He was going to Helsinki and Brussels and Paris, and I thought, that's really cool. I wonder what he does. So I got to learn more about what he does. He worked in marketing, and I thought, that's what I need to do. I need to work in marketing.
And be international.
My first goal in life, as strange as it sounds, at about 7 or 8 years old, was to be international. That was my goal. Didn't really have a profession in mind until I met Duncan, and then figuring out what actually is marketing. And also, I think my first holiday abroad was to France. I was about 8 years old, and I remember my mum teaching me some phrases, and one of them was, "Could I have the bill, please?" And I remember being in this restaurant it was like in the basement somewhere. We had a power cut and the lights came back on as they had candles and everything. And I asked this guy, the waiter, for the bill in French. So these words that are all like gobbledygook. And he was like, "Oh, très bien, monsieur." He brings me back the bill. And I was hooked from then on. I wanted to learn more and more phrases. So this idea of marketing, languages, it was kind of starting to form a picture. So this goal of being international through school, I don't know, you choose your subjects. It's like, oh no, you're not allowed to do a science and languages at the same time because of timetable conflicts or people just don't do that. So I ended up continuing with the languages, French, German, all the way to A-level. And then when it came to university, I wasn't quite sure what I should study. there was still this idea of being in marketing, being a business person. So my dad had this idea. He said, well, I know a guy locally in Washington, has his own business, quite a successful one. Let's go and have a chat. Mm-hmm. So we took all these prospectuses from different schools to say, well, here's what I'm thinking. Now, if I was to show up in 4 years' time and I'd completed a degree from one of these universities, we asked him, which would you give me the job from? Mm-hmm. And even from all these different schools, different parts of the country, he said Northumbria. So that was the one that became the area of focus, really. And I was looking at international business and French, so I could combine the two. Mm-hmm. Business, be international, and a language. Mm-hmm. German, I crashed and burned at A-level, having only 3 years to GCSE and then A-level. It was, I think, too much in too short a time. But French, I really, really enjoyed. I'd been on 4 French exchanges to France, which really helped develop the level. So I decided that's what I want to do. At the time, I had a bit of a period where I think my grades weren't looking that great. So I remember having to look into other options. I remember looking at the Navy and the RAF and stuff like that. But in the end, I did get the grades I needed to go to university. So got my place at Northumbria. And part of that was the 3rd year of the course. You had to study abroad for a year. So I thought, wow, that's great. So it's in France. And of course, like everyone else, they wanted to go to Grenoble or to Nice. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like you go skiing or you find somewhere with a great beach. Mm-hmm. Oversubscribed. And a mate of mine on my course, he said, well, I know La Rochelle really well. It's a nice place. It's by the sea. Mm-hmm. It's kind of it's unspoilt. It's a lovely area. Let's go there. So I signed up for that. And it was quite a tough year. You know, when you go from university, when the joke is you don't have more than 8 hours or so of lectures a week. And then all of a sudden you go from like 8:30 to 6 every day with an hour to 2 hours for lunch. Crikey. It's like having a proper job there. So really helped with French. It was quite tough to get that double degree. Mm-hmm. But part of that was you needed a 10-week placement to be awarded the double degree. Now the French, they're all over the summer of like, I'm going to apply to banks and hotels and little shops and work to get some experience on my CV. So it's quite good, really. I couldn't find anything. So I thought, I tell you what, the apartment I'm renting, I'll go and have a word with Corinne, who rented me the apartment. I said, I'll work for free. I'll cut the grass, clean the swimming pool, clean apartments, whatever you want. I just need 10 weeks work. So had a chat with him. They signed me up. I worked for 10, 12 weeks, I think, in the end. Worked my tail off all summer. Mm-hmm. Really enjoyed it. And they said, well, if you want, when university's finished, when you've done your 4th year, if you want to come back, there's a job for you.
It's brilliant.
So I thought, why not? Why not? At that point, didn't really know what I wanted to do. A lot of friends were getting into, you know, like the classic grad schemes that... You know, all you name the companies locally, big companies. And I thought, I'm not really sure about that. I'll go back to France. They gave me a 4-month contract to start with. I'll improve my French. I'll earn a bit of money. And it's the summer, so it'll be great weather. It's great food. And the plan was after that I was going to move to Spain with another mate I'd lived with at university to improve my Spanish. So this was an estate agency, and by the end I'd been working there. We had something like 600-700 apartments that we were managing. So for property owners, it was a really varied role. Actually, when I look back on it, I was probably quite jealous of those friends who were getting into these grad schemes that had quite nice salaries. But I realised looking back that they were quite narrow, these jobs, whereas I had... At 22, 23, I could be managing up to 6 people. I had responsibility of €250,000 I'd wire to property owners. Would literally do everything from dealing with some tax issues, maintenance charges. When the la merde was really hitting the fan, we would clean apartments. I'd clean the pool. I'd repair like electric shutters in apartments and stuff like that when things were knackered and that the maintenance guy was too swamped. So literally did everything. So it was like such great control and variety, and I pretty much knew most people in the town, a town of like 80,000 people, managing 700 properties. I'd go everywhere and I'd see someone I knew, and it was great. But you can imagine after a while, in the busy season, I was working 80 hours a week. I'd still go in on Sundays and I'd go through the post because I didn't have the chance through the day. The phone would be ringing off the hook from 9 a.m. when I switched the phones on until 12, and then 2 till 6. It got to be a point where I put so much into it. I'd met a lot of students, so I was actually in the less busy periods, which weren't really less busy, I'd go out quite a lot. So I was probably going out 4 nights a week. In the days when you're still 22 and you can go out drinking 4 nights a week and still be up for work, to do a 10-hour, 12-hour shift, it was great. If only that could happen nowadays. So there were so many great things about it. There were so many great people, great characters. The boss, Monsieur Georges, he used to talk to me in French with an English accent, and I just learned so much. And there were some great characters that worked in the trades that used to come and do work in the new residences. And it was great, but working at 8 hours a week, you can't do that forever. So I eventually reached a point where it was like total burnout. I couldn't even hear the phone ring without getting stomach cramps. I was getting aggressive with customers and, reaching a point where some people are swearing at you for having to wait and this, that and the other, and you wanting to put them through the estate agency window. And it's not like me as a character, as you might imagine. So they moved me into other roles that got me out and about a bit more. And those I'd trained up could handle more of the phone and that kind of side of things. But eventually it just took its toll, and I crashed and burned effectively. And it was probably, I always refer to it as about 2003. I had to take some time out. Probably the darkest time in my life, I think, where you question a lot of things. Your own life. What am I doing? Why am I here? I'm not enjoying this. And even at times I even had very dark thoughts about my own life and was it worth continuing? But refused medication from a doctor, and I just sort of thought, no, that's not me. You're going to leave a lot of people behind that care for you, and that creates more pain and anguish, so we'll get through this. But it took a lot to get through that. Now, at the time, I was, to try and get a bit of extra cash, I'd moved on from the agency. I decided I just need to make a clean break. And the sister company, which was part of the building, conglomerate's a grand word, but part of the same setup, I was teaching him English, that was it. And this was the sales side. So you had the builder of the residences, the estate agency was the one that managed the properties, and there was a sales agency that could provide a complete solution effectively. We build it, we'll sell you it, and our sister company, our subsidiary, will manage it for you. So it was a really nice setup, and that's effectively why they got bought out just after I'd left, because we built up something quite special. And I pitched to this guy, Laurent, and I said, you are missing a trick here. I'd said, you've got new build residences to sell, but what about when you don't have something to sell? You've got these massive peaks and influx of income and commission, but nothing else. So I said, how about I help you open up the door to what's already built and English-speaking markets. I said there'll be French agents, they'll say they can sell better than I can, but English people aren't going to trust a Frenchman trying to sell them a property, the harsh reality of it. So I started to work for him, and it completely opened a new avenue for the agency. So on literally a 10-minute conversation, he's like, actually, you know what? You're right. Let's do this. So quite slow going in the beginning, as you might imagine. We're up against, now this is probably, 2004? So things like Google, websites were a bit more prevalent, but we're up against the big players. It's like Foncia, Orpi, Guy Hockey and all the big agency networks, Century 21, with massive marketing budgets. So often I'd learned in my approach that you'd sit down with people, you'd spend the time understanding what their motivations were for selling or for buying. And I tried to have an approach that would get me houses under contract based on my approach. I couldn't outmarket the big players, and I started to get a little bit of success from that. But with it being so slow, I was kind of not feeling challenged. At the time, the guy who was the legal guy in the team, we always used to talk rugby because I'd played from about the age of 10 until I was about 22 in England, and then I'd fractured my wrist and stopped playing for a year or two. And he's like, "Oh, you should surely be still playing. You look pretty fit." Even though I thought I was old at the time, I was probably like 24, something like that, which not old at all, really, is it?
No.
So he's like, "I tell you what, I know a few people in the local club. Leave it with me." And then a bit of time went by, a couple of weeks went by. I got this random phone call. I picked it up, and it was a South African guy at the end of the phone. And he starts asking me a few questions, and he's like, "Oh, I've talked to Daniel, and he says you'd quite like to play some rugby." I was like, "Yeah, that sounds good. Not played in a while." But I'd said I'm not really at first team level. I said I've not played in a couple of years. I'm not trained. Because they were professional. So he said, "Okay, well, come along to the development squad," which was what I did. So I came down for, whether or not you call it a trial, it was probably towards the end of the season by this point. The difference from what I'd come from in the UK, I mean, I'd played at the Falcons and the Colts, and you kind of turn up and you'd get on for 10 minutes at least if there were a lot of players. So, but part of something I'd not experienced was at a semi-professional level, even the development squad was getting paid probably like €300 a game. So they wanted to see commitment to training, your dedication, your passion to want to be there. So this was 3 hours about 4 times a week on an evening. To go from a burnt out, depressed state to training 4 times a week, what a transformation. My physique, my overall health, my mental well-being, my mental state completely transformed within probably a couple of weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks, coupled with this other job. And I felt really quite alive, and it was really quite exciting to be around the club that now does really quite well in the top 14, the French division, hanging around the first team players, lifting weights with some of them, that kind of thing. It was really good fun. I'd cycle the few miles or whatever it was to get to the club, and just really enjoyed it. You're running in the sun, and well, sadly I tore a thigh muscle.
Ouch.
Yeah, I had lots of physio, and it sadly never healed. So I always say that was that was the end of my rugby journey, sadly. And at the time I was feeling not very challenged in the agency, so had a word with my boss, Laurent, talking about doing something else studies-wise to complement what I was doing. And he said something that was probably one of the most selfless things I've ever had a boss actually tell me. And he'd said, "Do you know what, James? I love having you around, and I appreciate what you're doing to help me grow the agency, but I'm holding you back. I can't help you reach your potential." I was like, "What? No, you're supposed to be telling me, oh, try this, try that." But no, he said, "I've got a mate who lives in China. He works for Carrefour. He's had all these opportunities. So he said, you need to be more international, using your languages, traveling, getting out there, seeing more of the world. I don't want you to leave necessarily, but you should really do this. I don't want to hold you back. If you always want to come back in 10 years time, 15 years time, whatever, yeah, that's cool. But please just leave."
Get out.
So I thought, what a selfless thing to say. So in the end, I looked around. I had a word with Duncan, if you remember, the former neighbour, who suggested doing an MBA, a Masters of Business Administration. So looked around, didn't want to do it in an English-speaking culture. I'd lived with 3 guys from Norway, and I thought, ooh, Scandinavia, that sounds like a cool place to go. So I looked around, did the GMAT exams, and got accepted into the Stockholm School of Economics. So this is about 2005. So I leave France, and everyone thought I was going to play basketball in the States when I said I was going to do an MBA. But Stockholm, wonderful, wonderful place. So, I mean, we worked very hard in that, but it was kind of getting back into studying, into business. We did some really cool projects with Scania. So we used to go and drive the buses and the trucks. And we worked with H&M on some market entry strategy and a small startup business. And it was really, really, I'm trying to think how to describe it. It's like a level up of development. I'd had a few years experience in France. My French was really slick, but here I was in somewhere totally new. There's a different language, and I really loved it. The food's really good, and going from semi-professional training to sitting, doing a lot of work, eating a lot of chocolate. And I mean, some of the daily lunch deals they had on like these meats and creamy gravies and mashed potatoes every day. I put on like 10 kilos in about 10 months. So I wasn't looking my trimmest, shall we say. So I often say MBA actually stands for more belly after. So I thought, I really like this place, but I've worked so hard. I don't want to leave, actually. I'd quite fancy living here. So you've got everything you need. It's kind of a bit like Newcastle. You've got all the shops you want, but you're very close to nature.
Yeah.
And really, really great people. So I thought I'll have a look for work. Now, I tried in lots of different areas, didn't find anything. So I thought, well, maybe I should go back to property construction, which is where I've come from. Then doors started to open. I got a couple of offers for an agency. Well, not agency. It was, what do you call them? Like property consultant type roles, which would have paid well, would have been in part of a big international structure. And then I'd applied for another role, which was a management trainee program at a big Swedish construction company called Skanska. And I was up against the best part of 100 candidates. And I went through this, whether it was assessment centres and different stages of interview to be in the commercial development division. And the one English guy against, I think it was 96 Swedes for this job. And I got down to the final 2. And I met the president of the division. And I remember just saying, if you don't hire me because my Swedish isn't fluent, you're making a mistake. I've done it in France. And what was hard in France, obviously they don't teach you all those words at school, do they? For, burst pipes and knackered boilers and stuff. So you go from being the village idiot to having quite a wide vocabulary. So in the end, they offered me the role. And I spoke to the other 2 businesses and they said, go and take the job at Skanska because you'll learn more than you will with us. If you want to after that, you can always come and, we can have another chat again.
Yep.
What was great about this role, it didn't feel like I was tying myself to a job. So you got set project times. So I was in the commercial development division, which was the most successful of all the divisions in the company. And they built some really great stuff and made lots of money. And they were just so good at what they did. Flat hierarchies, you learn about fika, the coffee times, the relationships everybody had. And it was just a pleasure to be there. But the Swedish was really quite challenging to come from a very, very basic level. All your Excel documents are in Swedish. A lot of this was investment related, the bits I was working on. So a lot of vocabulary to learn. So I never quite felt like I was contributing as I wanted to.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a challenge. But part of the great bit of, I always say about the role was that the personal development that they offered with Mimi and Søren, still friends on Facebook. It was just the most wonderful thing I've ever done. I think spending a week with the group, getting to know each other, doing lots of different tests, physical assessments, talking through what had happened, group dynamics, leadership. It was just immense. And I'd say I'd go back to do it all again just for that. Now, part of the role then needed to be project based. So I'd gone from the commercial side, which was more investment, project management, that sort of thing. And I managed to be given New York.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So I found myself in New York on a construction site, British guy, on a hospital job. And it was really eye-opening, but I had such a good team to work with there.
Mm-hmm.
My boss Dan, Marisol that I worked with, the project admin, John who was the site superintendent. They all worked really well together, all very different characters, but great experiences. And I learned so much as part of that, looking at drawings, dealing with architects, managing the finances, finding when the trades had screwed you over on some of the invoicing and that kind of stuff. And it was, I think, for me, getting to New York, I tried to fit in everywhere. I guess as a young lad, I was always quite quiet, and I'm not that I'm a loudmouth now, but I had gone from being a chameleon in France, in Sweden, trying to be as good in the language as I could to fit in, get to New York, and everybody likes individuals, people with their own style, their own character, their own personality. And I thought, I've arrived and I can be myself. And I thought, this is a great place to be. And there was always something going on. I mean, if you've ever visited New York, there's a real buzz about the place, and always like such energy, opportunity, and going to work every day. We just, a really great team, as I said. And I learned a huge amount. And I thought, even if I don't want to be in construction forever, I actually want to learn as much as I can, and I can take that forward. It doesn't have to be forever, does it? So I had a chat though with my boss and with John, the superintendent, and we'd sort of come to this conclusion. He said, we love having you around, and if you want to come back, awesome. But we just see you as more of like a business guy, and you're the one who's finding the deals that we can then build. I was like, okay, well, that's fair enough. That's good feedback. And by the end of the program, I was kind of thinking, I'm not sure that this is the place for me. So I ended up, a friend of a friend said, oh, well, why not try somewhere like Goldman Sachs? Businessy, you've got the right kind of background, you present well. I was like, okay, well, why not? So I got teed up and had this interview at Goldman Sachs. So I remember I got my hair cut. I remember my hairdresser in Sweden saying to me, oh, you've got, no matter how slick your suit is, your watch, your shoes, the thing that can let you down, James, is your nails. So I was like, okay, that's fair enough. So I just remember walking home one day from being on site. So I'm in my construction gear, my boots. Probably got the swagger going on that you used to have around because you're around all these macho dudes. And I remember going into this Korean nail bar. I thought I'll get my nails done before this interview. I go in and I talk really quietly. I'm like, I'm looking for like a manicure. And bless this poor lady, English wasn't her first language and I didn't speak any Korean. So there's a man getting a pedicure and he's like, I think he wants a manicure, honey, kind of thing. And she's like, oh yeah, sit down. So I got my nails done. So that was.
Did you go for pink or red? Or?
I kept it neutral colours for that
Pretty.
one. So nails were clean and sharp, on point, slick. And then what we did was, so I went to this interview, had a 3-hour interview. They said, yep, I like you. I think you'd fit in well here. So I thought, crikey, can I have a couple of weeks to look at what's happening in the market and then come back? Yeah, sure. I just wanted to kind of really understand what was happening in the world because it would come up in conversation without a doubt. So we're going to look at the property division based on what I'd done in the past. So that was fair enough. And then within about, not quite 2 weeks later, 10 days later, Lehman Brothers then had their announcement like, oh, we're screwed. And that was the beginning of the financial crisis. So got back in touch with this guy and he was like, oh, sadly, I don't even know if I've got a job. So that never happened. So it wasn't meant to be for Goldman Sachs. So, and the problem as well was I wanted to come back after the program to go back to the hospital, and they didn't get their funding for the next phase of construction. So sadly, they couldn't hire me. By this point, they'd already offered me a contract in New York. So one of the biggest projects at the time was the United Nations. It hadn't been touched, more or less, since it was built in the early 50s. So they're spending a couple of $1 billion with a B to completely renovate the site. Now, I'd worked as an assistant project manager, and then I get to the UN and I made the QA/QC engineer or lead, which is quality assurance, quality control.
Brilliant.
So, non-engineer, business studies as a background, and apart from my limited on-site experience, it was talk about getting chucked in at the deep end. So it involved a lot of things, stripping specifications for testing, inspection in instances in the specification to meet requirements, building up mock-ups, and my plans for taking what worked in other countries like the UK, Sweden, for practices around quality. It was, even though I absolutely did not enjoy going to work, again, part of it was the great people, the great characters there. You know, I'd walk around on sites, there were probably about 12 sub-projects, and people would be saying to me, oh, you know, how's the quality today, James? And it's like, it's not good enough, guys, you know, you need to level up. I've got some initiatives through getting people to fill in quality plans that we used to fill in safety plans before a trade would start working. So that was some progress, but I really wasn't enjoying it. I mean, it's cool to walk around all the corridors and all the bits you don't get to see as an outsider. You see the odd people like Ban Ki-moon walking around, and but again, the people were fantastic. I loved going for my coffee every day, and the Korean ladies who would teach me Korean phrases for good morning and thank you and all the rest of it. And I was probably about 14 months or so into the role. It was the financial crisis. There's always a lag time in construction, and then a lot of people were going to get laid off. And I remember getting called into a meeting at 2:00 one day, snowy day in beginning of March, and at 2:00 I was told, this is your last day.
Wow. Working
for Skanska. You've got till 5 to clear your desk, give us back your laptop, your phone, say a few goodbyes, and someone will escort you off the site and take your UN security badge from you. So, wow. So I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. So I've got this construction. I've got my hard hat in one hand, my box of things in the other, under one arm. And when you leave a job that you don't really enjoy, and you're like, thank God for that. But then there's that realization of, oh crap, I'm now an illegal alien because I need a visa, which I no longer have. So it was kind of it was tough. I mean, it got me into a mode where I became very focused on what do I need to do. In tandem, I'd been trying to find ways to do other things that would keep me excited and interested in the day-to-day. So I took the real estate salesperson's license to become a licensed real estate salesperson in Manhattan. Sadly, you can't get a visa for that, so I learned a lot, but I couldn't do anything with it. But I was always at a course, or I was always learning about flipping property, tax liens, financing properties. I was always on some kind of webinar. And with the downturn and with the layoff, I mean, I had to eventually leave the country. I came back as a tourist for 3 months because I had an apartment I couldn't get out of. So I had to wheel and deal a bit. My girlfriend at the time, she came and lived, which helped pay some of the rent. And you kind of become very resourceful when you need to, when your back's against the wall. There was a lot of opportunity with banks not financing commercial assets. So short-term bridge lending. I happened to be on a webinar. There was a guy who was very smart, former Goldman guy. And I kind of got involved with them. I set up a business. So, you know, what do you do when you've lost your job and you need to leave the country and you've got to ship all your crap home to the UK? I'll set up a business. I mean, talk about a set of balls. I don't know. I look back and think, Jesus, you had some cojones to do that. So I set this business up and eventually got some paid work with this guy. I was doing the due diligence on loan requests. So I'd take what was sent across, the sort of the loan packages, and I'd look through them. There was a lot of crap used to get. People used to finance anything on limited information. So I'd package it up, tee it up for I'll say the proper analysts, but those who would make more decisions on, is this a go or a no? And there were some really interesting deals. I mean, I remember getting a lot of crap from some people at times. I remember an asset that was a stockpiling facility for the US government, which is where in war times, so they hold on to lots of minerals, aluminium, nickel, aluminum, exactly.
Cilantro.
Maybe, I don't know. So that if ever there is another war, there's a stash of the right kind of materials for manufacturing whatever's needed in a war effort. And the government had been a tenant for about 50 years in this place. So I remember the guy who brought this to us was getting a lot of crap from the broker, like, how can you not be financing this? It's, grade A tenant, and it's the US government. And so I did some extra digging just to, revenge is sweet in these kind of instances. And I remember saying to the guy, look through the document you've been given as a contract. So their lease is up in September. I did a bit more digging in the long-term strategy of the US government, which was actually they were moving out of Ohio, I think it was, and shipping everything. It was to Nevada or California, somewhere like that. So they were no longer going to be a tenant. So this was going to be an empty facility. So, and I kind of went back to them and said, don't you think a major bank would be financing it if the US government was tenant? And here's all the reasons why it's a crap deal. And I really liked that research element, and I felt like I was helping people in some ways to finance their assets, which were pretty much underwater. But in the end, it just felt like we were, taking people for a few points percentage of commission and fees, and it was kind of didn't feel very ethical in some ways. So at this point, my girlfriend at the time, she tried to get a transfer back to the UK, was offered Hong Kong. I was like, well, look, if we're ever going to be together, I don't want you sort of whinging in 30 years' time saying, I wish I'd taken that job in Hong Kong. We'll figure it out if it's going to work out between us. So she did that. So we kind of made things work from the US, the UK, and Hong Kong. I lived in her parents' basement for about 3 months while I was getting set up outside of DC. Another great experience. And I eventually went to live there for 6 months in Hong Kong. Another great experience. I mean, I couldn't deal with the humidity in my 100% wool suits, which was ridiculous at the time. And again, I was trying to learn and do as much as I could, networking, meeting people. I took a couple of finance exams. I took the Hong Kong Estate Agency Authority exam to be a salesperson there. Whatever it could to get me into a role that would allow me to stay. Nothing really happened there. And at the time, I had a couple of properties that weren't rented. I had no income coming in, and it was as close as I could ever come to probably bankruptcy. Thankfully, my folks were able to help me out a bit short term, which got me out of a sticky situation. And I just realised I've got to come back to the UK. I can't do anything here which is going to give me that income. So made the decision, left, came back to the UK, and you thought, oh, well, I've got all this great experience. People will be falling over themselves to hire me, hopefully. And sadly it was, your construction experience is Swedish, it's American, your property experience is French. So I'd have to be starting at base roles again on really crap money. So I thought, I'm not passionate enough about it. So I thought, what can I do? What have I done before? I've worked in talking to lots of people. I've managed property, money, business I like. Sales is what I came up with. So I got back into sales, and it took me a while to find a role, but I ended up getting to something which, when you're almost hitting bankruptcy and you perhaps don't feel great about yourself, which I didn't. It was something that the people again around me, it was a real boost to morale. I was recognised by one of the managers as turning around the morale of the whole department. From a sales perspective, we'd friend and I, Alex, had turned around the market. Well, with a couple of other colleagues as well. It wasn't just us, but we got people interested again. Great relationships with the French marketplace, with these customers. Did a good job there. Had positive growth compared to a market that was in decline, but there was no kind of progression. It was like, oh, this is it. Pitched a few initiatives, and it was like, yeah, you can do that, but there's no bonus, there's no extra money. So I was like, okay, I'm done. So again, it doesn't have to last forever.
No.
Anything. I've been helping out a friend back in Sweden with her startup. Really liked it. So I was like, do you know what? I'm moving back to Stockholm. So startup world, again, when I look back, I think I've gone from nigh on bankruptcy to taking whatever job I could get in sales to make some money, just to kind of keep out from going bankrupt and getting back on my feet, to then being back in Stockholm, a position that had no income. I believed in it. I was passionate about it. It was creating book summaries in a kind of 30-minute format. I thought, that's great. I like that. It's people development. It's something I was really quite interested in. So in the end, I was sofa surfing. We were working 7 days a week, 17, 18 hours a day, getting out, meeting lots of folks. It was good fun, but also quite tough. And we ended up winning a position in an incubator. So from that, I come home at Christmas. We just got that announcement before Christmas, and I figured I'd had my wisdom teeth out that Christmas. So I had a lot of time to think. It's a great way to lose weight, actually, as well, after Christmas, if you're looking for some solutions.
I'm okay, thank you.
And I just figured, I can't do this. This isn't for me. It's not where I'm meant to be. So I've helped this person out, and I just have to get off here. So I came back to the UK, and then I took quite a long time to really reflect. What do I want to do next? What am I passionate about? What can I actually do? I was almost reaching a point of almost like total radical change. I was like, what do people always need in a downturn? Good and bad times, where I can always make money. So
Funeral directors.
Funeral director, no, not interested in that.
No.
Hairdresser, no. So I eventually settled on plumbing. So in that summer, I signed up at Gateshead College to do a plumbing diploma. So it was theory and a lot of practical. Something very different, but I thought people always need washing machines, plumbing in,
Thank you.
taps changing. Oh yes, of course I did. And it's fairly straightforward jobs, and it would be something I could do. So started on that. It was a year's course. In the meantime, I got back into sales again. So got into a role, so probably over the next 5 years. So I completed the plumbing diploma. It's a couple of nights a week, but really useful. Still obviously using it to this day.
And made good friends. It's a theme for your life.
Exactly. And I got back into sales again. So probably another 5 years. I managed a business development team for the UK market for a PLC. Quite stressful, but in the end, I kind of showed a different approach to sales. Not your typical wide boy, loudmouth sales manager, which there are a lot of. It was a much more different approach of actually having higher level conversations with, instead of it being like, all right, mate, do you want to buy a bag of threaded plugs? It was taking the conversation to a high level of, how can we look at all of your procurement needs for your components over this time? So, but again, it was quite a tough role. And another role I had was co-owner of a sales training business, which got to learn a lot and meet a lot of really interesting people in different businesses. And it kind of kept this sales theme going. So then as part of this, I was working from home, and I realized I was kind of, apart from getting out and meeting a few people for trying to find new contracts, I wasn't getting enough interaction with the world. So I thought, right, I need to get out networking, and found this event called LinkedIn Local, set up by your good self. And that's, of course, where we met.
Yep.
So that's kind of where we became friends. I was probably coming along most months, actually, wasn't I? Then we got into this discussion about, I probably just dropped a comment of, I've always fancied having a podcast or being on the radio or something. Next thing I know, we're doing a bit of training, and we've got the starting point to Inspiration North.
Yep.
And not long after this, I had, again, another episode of reflecting on life and my own health. So it was 1st of January last year. Had a really close friend in France who died. She'd had cancer. And at 43, it kind of gets you thinking about your own life. And I've been working hard, and my own health was starting to fail me. So I was in hospital, I was having biopsies, cameras down the throat, heart rate above 90 even at rest. And I just reached a point where I thought, I'll be dead within a couple of years if I don't do something. So decided to move on from the previous opportunity in the sales training business, and took some time out, focused on my health, thought about things, thought about life. And then we'd been doing the podcast on the weekends for a bit of fun. And then we've kind of turned that into more, haven't we? We've done the LinkedIn local event is now the Inspiration North Meetup. We've been course leaders for the Action for Happiness charity. We've started the Happy Cafe once a month. And that, I think, just helped me find more of my passion. It's helping people figure out happiness, fulfillment, and inspiring them to do that. And having done all these changes, moving, different jobs, it's kind of, now I feel in a place where it's like, right, this is it. This is where I'm meant to be. So helping others to figure out their path and direction is something I think I've always been really passionate about. It was less about hitting targets and filling pipelines, but actually the people around you and how are they doing? Are they in the right place? How can you help them develop? And so the work with Inspiration North and helping you to develop the business psychology practice, Insights Business Psychology, is really good fun. And I can see lots of opportunities that are going to come out of that. So I'm really quite excited about it all. So that's kind of my life in in under an hour sort of thing.
We're not revealing what's happening in the future. We're just going to keep that under wraps and keep everyone guessing.
Yes, let's keep everyone guessing. And then lots to come in 2020. So I'm quite excited about that.
Okie dokie. So
you've not said a lot. I do apologise.
Fine.
It's a bit of a monologue, isn't it, rather than a podcast?
No, it's great.
The James monologue. Today, James talked to himself about his life.
I was definitely here, though.
Yeah.
You probably hear my ums and and ahs. And yes, my little boy actually mentioned that I do a lot. I make him listen to the podcast. I do him good. Not the sweary ones, of course, but the other ones. And he says, "You say a lot, mummy." I do. So we asked.
Oh, we did. The listeners, didn't we?
We asked our listeners for some questions. And so, Alan, we have pretty much answered that question. He wasn't on the run.
Yes, no, I wasn't. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's not after me or
Interpol
or anyone.
No.
So
it's just to clarify that.
That's what I've done, education, business-wise, and really living in different places. It's make a decision. Decide you want to go somewhere, make it happen.
Yeah.
It's not luck. I just decided to move to Sweden or somewhere else and made it happen.
Awesome. So Dee, our very first guest on the podcast, and actually the lady who named it, I refer to her as my fairy godmother, asked a rather interesting question. I know you've been thinking about this one. So Dee has asked that at an intimate dinner party, you may invite two guests along, one living and one dead too. One who will teach you about life and the other one will teach you about business. Who do you choose and why?
It's very tough, this one. So the one I chose for the person living who would teach me about business, there are so many great examples out there, but I suppose the first one I really thought of was Bill Gates. So we all know about his rise with Microsoft, but I think what I like about it is the combination of what he's done in the corporate world, but then the side of philanthropy and how you can use a capitalistic type approach in building a mass corporation, but then using that for good. And that's, I think, something I've always admired. And of course, he's given away all of his fortune, isn't he? It was part of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I think he would teach me a lot about business, and he'd have some interesting stories
Yeah.
at a dinner table. And then the person that sadly is no longer with me, first person I thought of was my dad. So he died in 2016, and it's always those moments where I think, oh, we've just had a bit of good news, or we've just progressed and we've done something exciting, or we've got a great guest coming up. And first person I want to sort of give a call to is my dad. And so I think he'd be there teaching me about life. I think he's done that my whole life. So it would be less about that, but it would be to have the opportunity to actually say to him, here's what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And he'd be really enthusiastic about that. And we'd chat about it over a coffee. So they would be my two guests.
Awesome. Okay. So Tracy Tate asks, have you been struck by imposter syndrome? And if you have, when did this strike and how did you manage it?
When you look up the definition of imposter syndrome, I don't know that I've ever felt like a fraud. But what I've often experienced is probably a voice of doubt, which I think has been linked to my self-worth over the years. But with all of these different experiences, moving countries, changing jobs, learning new languages, being in positions where I feel like the village idiot, I've actually become comfortable being uncomfortable. So I've learned to recognize that this voice of doubt is just one of the voices in my head. There are others that are my champion, my cheerleader, my creative brain element as well. So I've had that voice of doubt my whole life, but I've worked on it. I've looked back, I've worked on my self-worth with a coach, and I've learned to just accept that as part of my brain. It's something trying to protect me, and I'm now using that as just an element of, why is it telling me this? What can I learn from that? And actually just to roll with it. So it's part of being uncomfortable, isn't it?
Okie dokie. Jen Tate has asked, what do you each see as each other's best business attributes?
I think if ever I have an idea, while I'm still reflecting on it, getting feedback, considering all the different angles, you've already gone off and done it. And you're kind of never beaten by things, technology or anything really. So I always admire that. It kind of works really well between us. And then when you lose interest in something, I then pick it up and carry it on to the finish line.
You're the complete finisher.
Yeah. So I think that's what I'd say.
And the most wonderful Joe Darby has asked, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
There were a couple here that I thought of. The first one that came to mind, so my grandpa in Yorkshire, bless him, we used to go out and do lots of things. Kind of guy, we just make our own screws and we just build things on the farm and grow vegetables and the like. And anyway, we're out one night. He's teaching me how to shoot. So we're out with a shotgun, and his way of teaching me the way around the farm, his amusing bit of advice was, now remember, James, on a farm, it's behind a shooter, in front of a shitter. So someone with a shotgun, you need to be stood behind them, in front of a piece of machinery that is spreading manure. You need to be in front of that. So still stay with me to this day.
Yeah. So looking back at our scene from the sidecar
podcast 54.
Yes. We talked about guns and in particular bazookas. So you don't want to necessarily be behind a bazooka, do you? What do you want to do when there's a
or in
bazooka?
front? You just run towards them and give them a hug. Then they can't do anything. But the serious advice, it's quite a difficult one, this one. So I think I'd probably say it was a bit of advice I was given by one of the executive vice presidents at Skanska, and it was, you don't always win by being right. And at times, what's frustrated me most with corporate bullshit and bureaucracy is that actually doing the right thing is not always what someone wants, or you've got to fight for it. And there's times where you just think, I'm right here, but it isn't worth it. And there's times I've been in hot water because I've put my opinions out there as to like my Jerry Maguire moments, as to this is what should be being done, but isn't. And sadly, I've come to a realization that in bigger firms, you just can't change them. So I've become more of a realist, a realistic optimist, or an optimistic realist, whichever way around it is. And even if you're doing it right, doing what feels best doesn't always guarantee that you get the results that you want to. So I think that's some really good advice. And really, because of that, nothing has to last forever.
It's true. Okay, so we gave all the opportunity to ask questions to other people, and I thought it would be hilarious to do some quick fire ones that you haven't seen and be able to prepare for.
Oh no.
So, do you have any New Year's resolutions, being it's the beginning of January?
Well, yes, I've still got to write them down, actually. That's something I need to do this weekend. But one is very much linked to fitness. So having had a couple of years of stress and burnout, my health's not been great. So that's the plan. Lean and mean in 2020. And get back into other things that I've really enjoyed that are more creative. So I've started learning Spanish again on the Duolingo app. And a friend gave me a piano book for Christmas. So I'm going to start learning this properly from the plunking I did with my granny when I was a little boy. So
excellent.
There's sort of 3 goals.
Marvellous. Okay, so if you won £1 million on the lottery, what would be the first thing you bought?
Well, the first thing is I wouldn't tell anybody.
Oh, no.
Ooh, the first thing I would buy. I remember reading advice that said you should go away somewhere. So you then reflect on the magnitude of winning a big sum of money and then know what to do with it. So rather than buy something crazy like a sports car for my midlife crisis, I'd probably do that. I'd buy a ticket to somewhere like the Seychelles, far away from the UK, and sit in a hammock and think about things, and then call my financial advisor.
So if you disappear one day, then I know you've won the lottery.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so, and then final question for me, it's a tricky one, and I thought of this just on the spot. If you could live in any time in history, when would it be?
Any time in history? Ooh, that's a very difficult one.
I know.
Things are probably portrayed as being a certain way, but aren't. Like, you imagine we're in the 20s now again, aren't we?
The roaring 20s.
The roaring 20s. So if we went back 100 years, sort of the whole Bertie Wooster type years in London would probably be quite good fun. But maybe I always used to like watching the James Bond movies and actually not knowing where the countries were that he was getting shot at and drinking martinis in. And perhaps to a more innocent time when we didn't know where everywhere was on the map, and there were those people exploring, bringing back products that people had never seen before. So I don't know how far back you'd go. 150 years maybe. It's a tricky one.
Yes, isn't it? Sorry. Not really. Okay, so we're also talking about going back in time. So the final question, if you could get in your DeLorean and go back to your 18-year-old self and sit yourself down and have a conversation with yourself, what advice would you give the 18-year-old James?
So we've talked to a lot of guests now, haven't we? Probably the best part of 60 guests. Yep. And I don't think I'd say anything that would change direction. Who I am today has been based on the highs, the lows, the good decisions, the bad decisions. So I wouldn't give any advice on that. One crucial thing I think would be make your health a priority.
Yep.
Because when you're working on things you are passionate about, that will give you the drive and the momentum to keep cranking things out day to day to make things happen. But when things aren't, as I'd found after the estate agency, you can burn out. Even last year, you're not in a great place to actually make some changes. So if health is a priority, then that will make perhaps one of the most massive differences in your life. And I suppose the other part is that when you persist at things, keep persisting. And also that nothing really has to last forever. So whether it's a job, place where you're living, a country, you can change that if you want. Set your mind on it commit to that decision and figure out how to make it happen. And you can do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you ever so much for having the tables turned on you. I'm a bit terrified
It's been
now.
a bit different, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to be doing it. You're going to be doing it to me now.
Yes, can't wait.
Eek. So this has been James and Rochelle in the Inspirational Headquarters.
Yeah.
And thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.